Thank you again for being here, and we're excited to have you again this year. 2020 is a strange year, but we are surviving. The polling questions did demonstrate to us what I think most of us already knew. Most of us are working remotely, and it looks like most are doing virtual enrollments this year. And if you need any assistance with that, please let us know. Betsy Kamler, who will be on in a little while, is the one that coordinates that for our clients. We will show you what we're doing, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, this is the 2020 mid-market survey that we have been doing for many years now. First time to do it on a broadcast basis, but we're glad to have the technology to be able to bring this information to you. And we hope that you're going to find it to be very useful. Next up is a featured speaker we've used quite often, Bob Radicky. Bob is also here with us with Sarah Gersevich, who basically will be working with Bob today on his presentation, and also Sarah Gillespie here in our office, who's our compliance director. We're excited to have Bob. Bob is in a cabin in the woods up in Minnesota. He decided to flee the city, I think, for a while and go to his home down by the river, right?
That's right.
So we're glad to have you here. Bob is the President and Senior Regulatory and Public Policy Analyst at Benefits Comply. We rely on Bob heavily to keep us up to date on legislative issues. And Bob, even for those of you who are here in the Mid-South watching the broadcast, used to live in Memphis years ago. So
I did.
Bob's been around for a long time. And Bob, we appreciate you and Sarah being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. And I do want to talk to your marketing department, though, because now that I've, like a lot of us, grown the COVID-19 salt and pepper beard, my 10-year-old picture from marketing it's obvious that it's a 10-year-old picture. So we need to update that picture going forward. So I use one that's a little more accurate portrayal, right?
Yeah, Bob, they made me get a new one too this year.
Yeah, right. We have to do that at least every 20 years. Once it gets over 10 years, it's a little embarrassing, isn't it? Thanks everybody for joining us. And Rick was being kind. I actually did have to admit that I kind of made a mistake. I knew that we would be having this presentation today and we'd be speaking to all you when I did head up to the cabin. Of course, I left my work clothes hanging on a hanger in the door next to my back door when I left, and they're still hanging there. And so all I have to offer is my casual shirt. I like Milliman pointing out that a significant portion of employers in that survey were saying a casual dress code is okay. So thanks for bearing with me. Yeah, and I have two Sarahs helping today, and so not often do we have two Sarahs, both with last names ending in G, on the same event. So Sarah Gersevich on my team is going to be watching those questions you said and send into chat. We would encourage you to do that. I also want to just make a comment about the talent that you have working with Lipscomb and Pitts. Our compliance firm, we're a bunch of analysts and attorneys that, like Rick said, work on legislative and regulatory issues and work with a number of leading agencies or brokerage firms around the country. And Lipscomb and Pitts is our partner in the Mid-South area. But not very many of our clients have, and Sarah, Gillespie, you didn't know I was going to say this, so it's not very many of our clients have also an internal compliance expert with the skill set that Sarah Gillespie has. She knows a lot about the stuff. She's helping all of you deal with this. And so today, when we talk about a lot of this, you have a unique opportunity to work with Lipscomb and Pitts and Sarah to sort out how it affects you. And that's a deliverable that a lot of places don't have, Sarah. And I sincerely say that. I will. But the best way I could give you a compliment, Sarah Gillespie, is when you and I talk, or you talk to one of our team, your thoughts and questions are always really hard, because you're way in the weeds and dealing with stuff that is not normal. So that's good. That's a good thing. So what our goal today is not to go into gory detail on a lot of things, but really to help make sure that you've seen and paid attention to all the stuff you've had to deal with the last few months. I tell you, I've been in this business a long time, and I am not saying this just to be nice. For the human resource managers and employee benefits departments, this has probably been the most difficult, the craziest time in my entire career, hands down. Not only are you dealing with all the issues around COVID-19 in your workforce, the number of new rules and regulations and changes that have been thrown at you in the last few months is really, really daunting. So I feel for you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to, and Sarah Gillespie, I know you've been sending stuff out. You've been telling people about this as it's been happening over the last few months, but it's just so much that we thought what we do today is touch on a lot of the things that have happened and things that you need to be aware of briefly. Not to go into any one of them in gory detail, maybe make a couple comments about things that are important about them. But at the end of the day, we hope you said, okay, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I took care of that. Yeah, I got to think about that. You know, kind of almost like a checklist if you think of it that way. So that's our goal. And then I'm going to take out my little crystal ball and tell you exactly what's going to happen in Congress over the next 2 weeks. Ha, ha, ha. Good luck with that one. I will actually tell you what we expect out of a couple of pieces of legislation that are being worked on right now, though. So let's start with, and then last thing is we're going to focus exclusively on employee health and welfare, employee benefits issues. You know, so a lot of the legislation we're talking about, the CARES Act and the FFCRA, had tons of stuff and really important stuff, unemployment compensation, you know, all those things. We're going to focus on the legislation and regulations exclusively that affect your employee benefit programs you offer your employees. Okay, that's where we're spending our time together today. So let's start with some of the things. And I will, one last comment before I get into the details is, you know, doesn't February seem like a million years ago? I mean, when we talk about these things being passed in March, April, May, that's just a few months ago. And to me, February seems like 10 years ago. I don't know what this pandemic has done to our sense of time. But so all of this has passed or been released by either regulators or Congress since March. Okay. So the first one, you all heard about this, is when the FFCRA, FFCRA or CARES Act, I can't remember which one it was, I got it in my notes, required that your health plans cover diagnostic testing for COVID-19, the testing costs. A couple points about the diagnostic testing rules. One is that it only requires testing for medical purposes. If you are, for example, doing testing for return to work, you know, maybe some employers are doing testing as employees come back to work, your plans aren't required to pay for that. You might be paying for that as an employer, but your health plan isn't required to pay for that. Your health plan is required to pay for COVID-19 testing when it's physician directed or part of medical treatment. We're going to talk about this a couple times. A lot of these changes could cause problems for people with HSAs. When this one was released, they made sure that if you do have an employee with a high deductible health plan and an HSA, providing this coverage won't hurt the HSA eligibility. You know, normally, remember, when somebody has an HSA, they can't have first dollar coverage for treatment other than preventive. So when the testing requirement came out, it's still okay to pay for their testing and not affect their HSA eligibility. Last but not least, real clear, this only requires your plan to pay for testing at 100%. It doesn't require you to actually pay for the treatment for COVID-19 at 100%. You pay for the treatment people get if they get sick from the COVID-19 under your regular terms of your plan, like any other medical treatment, okay? Around the same time, Congress decided that wanted to encourage telehealth usage. Interesting listening to Milliman talk about how many of us avoided regular health care, right? And so telehealth is a way for us to get some of what we need without having to go to the doctor. So the rule came out that if you do expand telehealth or you expand payment for COVID-19 treatment, some employers voluntarily, even though it wasn't required, improved coverage for COVID-19 treatment. If you do either of those on your plan, again, if someone's on a high deductible health plan with an HSA, you're not going to ruin their HSA eligibility. You can have that expanded treatment without ruining that eligibility. this was, I should have mentioned, some of the changes we're going to talk about are temporary and some are permanent. So we try to note that when it matters. And so this one, being able to provide expanded telehealth and coverage for COVID-19 treatments doesn't ruin your HSA eligibility only through next year. Unless Congress comes and changes this more permanently, that's a temporary rule that we can provide that expanded coverage and still be HSA eligible just through next year. The next one is different. They decided to let us have some new reimbursements under our either Health FSA, HSA, or even an HRA. And I don't know if you remember, but when the ACA first came out, you remember they took away being able to reimburse over-the-counter drugs. Remember, that was part of the ACA back 10 years ago. And so that was reversed. Now we can reimburse over-the-counter drugs, or we can use our Health FSA money to get over-the-counter drugs reimbursed, and expanded being able to reimburse menstrual products that weren't necessarily an eligible expense before. The next couple I'm going to talk about are, again, permanent changes. Well, the next one is a permanent change. Little background here. When you have a Health FSA, you have two kinds of additions you can make to it, right? You can have a Health FSA with a carryover, meaning if I haven't used my whole Health FSA, you can let employees carry over some of their balance the next year. Or you can have a Health FSA with a grace period, meaning you can let people, if they have a balance at the end of the year, use the next 2.5 months into the next year to submit, to incur claims. You can't have both. You have one or the other. Well, the grace period rule, I don't remember when it first came out, a few years ago, allows you to roll over $500. I'm sorry. Sarah Gersovich virtually kicked me via text message there when I said grace period rule. I meant carryover rule. The carryover rule allows you to let your employees carry over $500. Plan year over plan year is now going to change every year. It's now $550, and going forward, it's going to be tied to the maximum Health FSA, not election, what's it? Payroll deduction that you employees can make. This year, payroll, max payroll election for Health FSA is $2,750, right? So you take 20% of that, that's $550. And so both of them will go up based on the IRS announcement every year. So the carryover will just be now more valuable going forward because it'll be increased every year based on that change. Last but not least, and then I'm going to step back and let the Sarahs either take any questions or comment, and that is, we could do an entire webinar on the FFCRA emergency paid sick leave and expanded FMLA leave. We could talk about that for hours. That was a real big lift on your part as HR managers to deal with this. But for those of you that aren't maybe directly involved in that, this was when the new rule came out that said, remember, there's two new kinds of leave that are required. There's a 2-week emergency leave, partially paid, that you have to give your employees if they're either quarantined or can't work because of lockdown, or taking care of someone that's quarantined. And then there was the new expanded FMLA leave for someone who can't work because they have to stay home with their children because the school or daycare is closed. This is becoming, again, this issue is becoming, again, a big deal, right? Because now we're coming into a new school year, and we have a lot of employees that may re-engage with you about taking this new FMLA leave if they can't work because of the kids not being able to be at school. In both of those cases, the requirement is that you have to maintain health insurance the same way you did as an active employee. Now, the 2-week emergency sick leave, that's kind of a given, isn't it? I mean, if you've given someone 2 weeks emergency sick leave, having them gone for 2 weeks probably wouldn't have affected their eligibility for benefits anyway. So that one's no big deal. The FMLA leave is interesting. You have to think about this, taking FMLA now to stay home and take care of the kids, the way you always think about FMLA for old traditional FMLA leaves. FMLA has always required you to provide health insurance, same contribution, same benefits as if they're actively employed. And so this is just one more FMLA event that you have to do that for. So be careful with this one. If people are going to take some time off this fall because they can't work because they have kids home from school, have to maintain the health benefits as they were as actively employed.
Hey, Bob, you were mentioning which ones of these are permanent and which ones are temporary. I thought it might be helpful as well to mention which ones are either mandatory or automatic, and then which ones are optional, because the optional ones require action on the part of the employer. So if we look at this list, COVID, that one obviously is mandatory.
Right.
The telehealth is automatic. But the expanded HSA, FSA, HRA, as far as those things, that one's optional, and you would need to amend your plan. The health FSA carryover, optional. And then the FFCRA, that's automatic, mandatory.
Okay, great point. Maybe Sarah, with your experience, is there any reason, I mean, I would think the carryover, if an employer is going to do a carryover, I would think most would want to do the new total. It just, do employers ever limit the carryovers in the past? Did anybody ever do less than $500 in the past? Have you had any experience with that?
I haven't had experience with that. I know you can,
Yeah.
but it would seem to me that, this is a benefit for the employee that you offer to help them have another avenue to pay for their healthcare expenses. So giving them the full advantage of the 550 would make the most sense to me.
Yep. I think most will probably do that if they choose to do the carryover. Yeah, good point. Same with kind of the over-the-counter drugs, right? I mean, it's just giving employees a better option to use up their money.
Right.
If they put it away. And I think a lot of employers are trying to increase their health FSA participation because there's a tax benefit to the employer too, right? If
Exactly.
employees put more money aside pre-tax, the employer saves some payroll tax. So okay.
Right. So if you limit the amount that they could carry forward, they may not put as much in it the next time, which does have an impact on the employer as well.
Yep, exactly. I wish I could say that so much has happened since March could have fit on one slide, but I would have been lying because there's a lot more, right? This one is probably the core one. If you leave today just with a better understanding of one thing we talk about, I hope it's this one. And these are these extended time frames that the IRS and Department of Labor released rules on. Before we go into what it affects, is you really have to understand the definition of outbreak period. Without knowing exactly how to determine an outbreak period, you can't deal with this administratively. So the outbreak period is pretty straightforward. It is whenever the national emergency that the Trump administration declared, that was declared effective March 1st. So we all remember back a few months ago, a national emergency was declared effective March 1st. It's still in force. It hasn't been changed yet. The outbreak, we don't know when the administration or Congress may choose to say there's no longer a national emergency. The outbreak period is different. The outbreak period is whenever the national emergency is declared over, then you add another 60 days. So we don't know when the end of the outbreak period is. Is the national emergency going to be at the end of August? Is it going to be the end of December? Is it going to be sometime next year? We don't know. So we won't know when the outbreak period is over until we get official confirmation that the national emergency is declared over. Why is that important? Because during the outbreak period, you have to basically ignore or extend many really important employee benefit timeframes. Okay. And so the first one we put up there is HIPAA special enrollment. So again, each one of these will go in great detail, but again, you've got L&P and Sarah, to rely on here. So I'm not going to go in detail, but, just real basic. The HIPAA special enrollment rules are those, when an employee loses other coverage or is Medicaid or CHIP eligible or has a marriage or those ones that that if they have one of those HIPAA special enrollment events, you have to let them into your plan mid-plan year, right? That's the HIPAA special enrollments have been around for 25 years. Well, under the HIPAA special enrollment rules, that participant or employee has to tell you within a certain time frame to be eligible for that HIPAA special enrollment. Those timeframes are different. They're usually 30 days, but it's 60 days for a couple of them. The point being, Sarah, if I work for Lipscomb and Pitts, I can't come to you and say, oh, Sarah, I got married 7 months ago. I'd like to come on the plan now. Sarah would say, take you this long to figure out you just got married. I mean, there's rules. Well, I couldn't say that until this year, because now the deadline for me to tell you I've had HIPAA special enrollment is it's on hold until the end of the outbreak period. So if I got married March 2nd, why did I pick March 2nd? The national emergency started March 1st. If I got married March 2nd, maybe you would have normally said I had to tell you within 30 days. I get to now come and tell you within 30 days of the end of the outbreak period. I may, if the outbreak period ends later this year, I may come to you, Sarah, and say, hey, Sarah, I got married March 2nd. And you'd be required to put me on the plan. So that notice of HIPAA special enrollment has been put on hold, and we will have some late enrollees because of this. Now, I'm not worried about insurance companies. Insurance companies know about this. They'll let you late enroll them, but it's going to be administratively a bit of pain of the you-know-what. The other one that's really problematic is Cobra. All of you that know and love Cobra, that's been around for 30 years, know that there's lots of important time frames, right? When somebody has a Cobra event, they have to elect within 60 days. When somebody is on Cobra, they have to make their payment within a 30-day grace period. And I just put 3 of them up there, but there's, lots of different Cobra events. Now, those time frames for the participant to execute whatever notice they have to make to you on their Cobra event is basically put on hold until the end of the outbreak period. I'm going to give you an example in just a minute of an election period. Actually, let's do this. Let's do the example quick and then come back, because Sarah Gillespie, I know you and I have talked about this. The grace period one is really the real problem child. So I think if we do the example of the Cobra of election period first, it kind of paints the picture, and then we can talk about the grace period. So imagine in my example here that someone had a Cobra event April 15th. Normally, a coverage ends April 30th. They elect Cobra, and their coverage would be effective March 1st. Normal Cobra election rules would say that they had till June 30th to make their election, 60 days from the loss of coverage date in my case, right? Did I do that right? April, May, June. Yep. Okay. So if they lost coverage April 30th, they got till June 30th to elect their Cobra. That's what happens in normal times. We're not living in normal times. Under the national emergency, if that event happened April 15th and the employer sent their notice out on a really timely basis, that's great. The employer got the notice out. Their election period doesn't start until the end of the outbreak period. So now we've got national emergency, let's pretend, gets declared over at the end of this month, August 31st. That means the outbreak period isn't over until October 30th, 60 days after the end of the emergency. And then the person has 60 days to elect Cobra. So possibly this person could come elect Cobra by December 29th, and you'd have to reinstate it all the way back to May 1st, their original Cobra election date. Now, are we going to have lots of these? Probably not. But are we going to have some of them, and are we going to have to deal with some of these very late enrollments? Probably. Okay. Now I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to make the same comment. I don't have an example of this, but under Cobra, there's a 30-day grace period for premium payments, right? And if you don't make your premium payment within 30 days, your Cobra gets canceled during normal times. Now, the premium payment grace period is also on hold. So theoretically, someone could choose not to pay their Cobra premiums until after the outbreak period ends and get coverage retroactive to when they didn't pay payments. This one's tough, because if somebody doesn't pay their Cobra premiums, it might actually mean they just don't want it, right? So what I will just say one more rule about the premium payment one. The Cobra rules allow you to terminate someone's coverage if they don't pay during the grace period. only if you can reinstate it if they make their payment on a timely basis. So we're kind of a little bit betwixt and between here. And Sarah Gillespie, didn't tell you I was going to do this, but have carriers come out at all with the expressing any clear guidance on, if I have someone on Cobra, they don't pay me, I terminate their coverage, and 4 months from now they make up their 4 months of payments? Are carriers saying that they're going to reinstate that coverage? This one's up in the air, isn't it?
So most of the carriers put out statements about COVID, when that stuff was happening and the testing and all of that before it was even required, they all had things they were sending out. This, I haven't seen anything. So I think it's really complicated. On the other side, there's the carrier issue and getting that taken care of. There's also the employee issue. So if they understand this, but maybe only understand it to the extent that they can have coverage all the way back to whenever, I think it's really important that if they come to you and say, hey, I want to enroll, you make it clear to them that that's fine, but you're only going to have claims paid retroactively for the months for which you remit premium retroactively.
Right.
So that means that, you as the plan and the employee getting their claims paid only going to happen if they're able to pay 5 months of retroactive premium. So in some cases, it may be helpful when you're sending out Cobra notifications to say it on the front end. Just let them know this is available, but if you want to go this route, make sure that you have premium payment available whenever you do decide to retroactively sign up.
Yeah. I think the rubber is really going to meet the road. We're all talking about this kind of theoretically now, and here we don't even know when these periods come to an end now, right? Mm-hmm. As soon as we get to a position where we think that the national emergency is going to be declared over, we're going to need to start to prepare ourselves just for these, I don't want to call them exceptions because we don't have any choice, but these unique situations where we've got late payments coming in, late Cobra elections, late HIPAA special enrollments, and I don't want to sound like Chicken Little and the sky is falling here. I don't expect 300 people to line up at your door saying they were married May 3rd. That's not, from a volume perspective, I doubt that we're going to have people, but each one of these is going to be so kind of unique in the time frame and what they get and how long they get it, that each one is going to be a chore unto itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these items, just in keeping with what we did on the other page, these are all automatic. So these aren't, you get to choose them. They have the option.
Thank you for doing that. I should have like a big red symbol on the slide for those, right? Yeah, you don't get this choice. These people get this time frame, whether you like it or not, right? Yeah. Good point. I'll make one last comment about Cobra, that these delays also extend to the employer. I mean, employers are supposed to send their notice out within 14 days. There's rules that employers have to follow. And so theoretically, if you have some late Cobra notices that went out, you might have some flexibility here because of this rule also. But I don't really talk about that much because there's no reason as an employer to delay sending notices. Even if we have some flexibility, getting the notice out as quickly as possible on a timely basis is just the best thing to do, unless you for some reason you can't because of operations or whatever. So I wouldn't recommend slowing or changing or delaying your employer notice procedures, but the employees will have some extra potential benefits or time available. All right. So let's go to the next one here. That. Maybe a little good news, if there is such thing as good news in what we're dealing with here. The same outbreak period delay process also applies to some things the employer has to do. But before I do that, I was taking my bullet points out of order. The first bullet point is it also applies to deadlines in your plans, for example, for filing claims or claims appeals. So in other words, a lot of your plans have a run out period, for example, right? It says you have to file claims within 90 days, 6 months, whatever, after the end of a plan year. Because and that's very common in your ERISA plans. Those timelines are also delayed. So I do have an example for this one. I'm going to pop on the next slide also. And then I'll come back to this one for the rest of it. So for example, let's say you have a health FSA that has a normal 3-month run out period. Pretty common. And Sarah Gillespie, you might have some better perspective than I do. I don't know what the most common run out periods are on health FSAs. I used 3 months here arbitrarily, just for an example.
We usually use 90 days.
Okay. So typical health FSA says, you incurred claims during the plan year 2020. You got to submit those claims, got to get them in the pipeline within 90 days. Well, that's an ERISA claims rule that is now also told or delayed. So Sarah Gersovich, you might have been the one that invented this example. I can't remember because it's a really tricky example. We put something on here on purpose just to make a point here. So in our example here, health FSA requires a 90-day grace period, right? Or not, has a 90-day run out period. Let's say you got a 2019 plan, then normally your folks would have had to submit claims by March 31st or 30th. I didn't count 90 days, but roughly March 31st. Okay. With emergency now, let's again assume the emergency is declared over August 31st. When can I submit my claims to this plan? This is an interesting one because if I have a typo here. That should be October 30th. I just noticed I just made this slide at the last minute. If the national emergency was declared over August 31st, the outbreak period would end October 30th. I'm sorry, ignore the 2 there. And they would have to submit their claims by November 30th. Why? Because 2 months of their runout period had already passed when March 1st national emergency was declared. So their status was frozen on March 1st. How much more claims submission time did this person have on March 1st? A month. I did this one on purpose, and picked this one on purpose, and it's purposely complicated, but I think it illustrates the point. Whatever time frame you're dealing with, whether it's a Cobra election or HIPAA special enrollment or filing claims, you basically have to ignore the outbreak period like it didn't happen, and then give them their rights. Okay, so this back to the other things that have been affected by the outbreak period. Little piece of good news, employers, the second bullet point here, employers, you got to get a lot of stuff out on a timely basis. You got to get SPDs to your employees within 90 days. You're supposed to put an SBC out to employees during open enrollment periods, things like that. Those requirements for you, the employer, are also on hold. You would not technically be in violation if you get these things out late during the outbreak period, as long as you do it as administratively quickly as possible. And you also have been given some flexibility in terms of using alternative methodologies. Many of your businesses are working remotely. We saw those polls that Lipscomb and Pitts took before we started. So the departments have given us some flexibility. Maybe we're getting notices out via a regular email or putting it on a website and telling people it's there. Again, as long as we're being reasonable and doing it as administratively practical as possible, as fast as possible, we're not going to have enforcement against us. Again, my comment here is that if you're an employer and you can get the notices out in the systems you use, and you use online systems anyway, you can get them out on a timely basis, you should. I mean, all this really is if we get stuck because of the difficult situation we're in, something goes out a little late, we're not going to have enforcement against us, okay? I'm actually take a break there for a second because this last bullet point is one more that there's a ton of confusion. Sarah Gersovich, any questions or comments so far from the crowd?
Nope, we've got a quiet crowd today, so okay. I think you're addressing a lot of the detail.
Okay, all right. And please, again, I'll encourage you all. Sarah's watching the chat box there, so if you have some thoughts or questions, please send them in. All right, last one on this slide. just a minute ago, I gave you an example that said you had to let people submit claims that were incurred during the regular plan year. You know, basically your run out period was extended, right? I just said that 2 minutes ago, okay? This last bullet point, people confuse with that one. Congress gave us, not Congress, this was actually the IRS, gave us the option this year to let people incur claims longer. Essentially gave us the option to have a longer grace period. But this is, be careful, this only is available to non-calendar year plans or a calendar year plan that already has a grace period. So if you were a 2019 calendar year plan with no grace period, you got nothing. If you were a 2019 calendar year plan with a grace period, or if you're a non-calendar year plan that ends during 2020, you could let people continue to incur claims, not just turn them in, but actually incur claims to use up last year's plan money. Okay. This again is optional. I'm sure Sarah Gillespie was just going to make sure she pointed that out. This is optional. Since I stole your thunder, Sarah, I'll ask you, how many employers have you seen actually implementing this? I was wondering, because this is a big change to your health FSA, and I wondered if a lot of employers were just going to kind of say, oh, that's nice, but I don't want to really implement that in my plan. So again, this is very different. Only applies to some of you, and you can let people keep submitting claims that they incurred later in the year. Have you seen many employers take the IRS up on this offer, Sarah?
Yes, I've seen more take it up than have not, but I have gotten some employers say, well, we haven't heard from any employees with concerns, so we're not going to do that part. So we've had some FSA decab vendors send out surveys saying, are these things you would be interested in? And then they can respond, and then they'll create an amendment for them. And so most of them are checking the boxes for the over-the-counter meds and, you know, the new kind of stuff for that. Some of them are checking the grace period if they have that. But like I said, I've had a couple that said, well, we haven't heard from anybody, so we're not going to worry about it right now.
Got it. Yeah, probably perspective is, I mean, I suppose a lot has to do with how much of an uptake there is among employees of FSA elections, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got a health plan, I mean, an employer that's got a ton of people that put a lot of money into health FSAs this year relative to other employers, to Milliman's point, you know, they haven't been able to use that money up because they haven't been going to the doctor, right? And so those companies probably are more likely. If I have very few people that elected a health FSA, this gift just isn't as, you know, as interesting, right?
Yeah, I will say I had an inquiry recently about the dependent care account because they had money in it that they couldn't use for daycare expenses in the spring, and they were hoping to use it in the fall, and then school went virtual, and they don't have that option there either. And so they're really hoping their employer would extend the grace period, or I know we're going to talk in a few slides down the road that, you know, maybe there will be some legislative action that would help with that as well.
But right now, not you know, they're kind of, yeah, unfortunately kind of stuck, aren't they? Mm-hmm. All right, so let's keep going through our list here. I already went through that example. A couple more Section 125 cafeteria plan changes. And again, this is where employers can give their employees some extra flexibility, right? I mean, when you think about the purpose behind these rules, it's because, right, a lot of us put money into our health FSA earlier this year, not knowing that we were about to face a global pandemic, right? None of us predicted this coming. So employees have been put in a bit of a pickle if they put money away in their health FSA and things have changed on them, right? So just a quick reminder, most of the benefits people in the virtual room we're in know this. Typically, when you make an election change under Section 125, you're stuck with that election unless you have one of those Section 125 election change events that we've known about for years, right? You have to have one of the allowable events to make your change. That's how it works in normal times. And again, we're not living in normal times. What the IRS said is this year, employers are allowed to let employees make a bunch of changes that normally wouldn't be allowed, okay? there's 3 different things that are permitted. You could let people elect health coverage mid-plan year that had previously waived, even if they haven't had a life event. Now be careful with that one. Be really careful with that one. The IRS says Section 125 rules say you can allow it, but that doesn't mean the carrier has to permit a mid-year election unless it's a HIPAA special enrollment. So let's say I'm an employer with a fully insured plan and I say, yeah, I just want to be really nice to my employees. I just want to let anybody that waived come into the plan July 1st, no strings attached. I'd love to do that. Well, that's allowed under Section 125 rules now. You would have to clear with the carrier to make sure they're going to be flexible enough to permit that. I know there's some carriers that are really being flexible, but just be careful with that one, okay? The second one is employees can, for no reason, don't need any life event, make a change in their current election, either go to a different plan. Maybe they want to change from your expensive plan to your cheaper plan, or maybe they want to change from family to single or something. You could permit that if you want inside your own plans. The third one's a little more interesting. You could also permit somebody to drop your coverage and go enroll in, like, for example, their spouse's plan. But if they do that, you have to get them to actually sign a test, sign a certification that they're taking coverage elsewhere. So there's an extra piece of work there. Interestingly about these rules is the employer can mix and match. They could implement some of these, all of them. They could implement these for a short period of time. I've heard of employers that just say, okay, we're gonna let people make election changes, but it's only going to be a 2-week open period just for a special option or whatever. So the employer has a lot of flexibility in how they design and change these things. And again, I think Sarah Gillespie has more experience than any of us. When I'll make one more comment here on what employers are actually doing with this and not doing, I'd be interested in your insights, Sarah. But the last one is something that both Sarah's and I loved is that the IRS said, if we make any of these changes, we have to amend the plan document, of course, but they gave us until, that's not a typo. I think that's a typo, it's not. They gave us until December 31st next year, 2021, to make plan amendments for these changes that we would implement this year. I don't know about you, but December 31st, 2021 seems like about 45 years from now. That just seems like so far away that just I can't even think in terms of that. But I'm not saying you should wait that long, but at least as long as you get the plan amendments done by then, you're in compliance. Are a lot of employers, are some of these more popular changes than others, Sarah?
So it seems to come up when an employee comes to them and says, I can't pay for this richer plan anymore. Can I switch? Or, I've heard that maybe I could get coverage. Can I join the plan now? I didn't want it at open enrollment. Things like that. So it seems to be, the employee's inquiry is the catalyst for them starting this. But it is optional, and I have seen the mix and match. I've seen some. So like I said, my plan is too expensive. I want to drop down to the other one. So I've seen them want it for that reason. Then conversely, I've had employers who have like an HRA and then a regular PPO, and they don't want to allow the switch because the HRA is not set up to prorate the HRA amounts. And so someone who enrolls mid-year or towards the end of the year would be eligible for the full amount. So it just made more sense to the employer. Let's just take that one out, but let's allow the other 2 options, new elections, or I guess you could drop if you want to attest to other coverage.
Yep. I'm going to just give you a little preview of our last slide. We're going to talk about what's going on in Congress now. There's a whole bunch of more Section 125 changes being discussed in Washington, D.C. right as we speak. So we'll touch on those in a minute. So let's make sure you got your arms wrapped around what you can do now, because there may be some more decisions to make going forward. All right, thanks, Sarah. All right. When we were setting up the talk today, we wanted to make sure we focus on a couple really, I don't want to say unique, but really difficult issues for larger employers to sort out under the employer mandate. So this next slide is going to focus just on those of you that are applicable large employers. I think you know who you are, right? Most of the people on this call are with larger employers, but we have a mix, I assume. If you're applicable large employer with 50 or more FTEs, you've been dealing with the employer. It's officially called the Employer Shared Responsibility Rules, but The industry calls it the employer mandate. And, you know, just as a quick reminder, the employer mandate basically imposes two rules on you employers, right? You have to offer coverage to 95% of your full-time employees, or you face a very significant risk of the big A penalty, it's called. And the A penalty is calculated by taking, I think this year, I wrote it down so I could remember. The A penalty this year is $2,570 a year per full-time employee, not counting the first 30. So just a bit of perspective, that's about $214 a month times all your full-time employees, not counting the first 30. So if you miss that 95% mark, it's a big penalty. The B penalty is the one that says if you fail to offer affordable minimum value coverage to a full-time employee, they could go out and buy insurance on the exchange. If they get a subsidy, you're going to pay, this year it's about $320 penalty, but that one's only per employee that goes and buys the coverage. So these are the two penalties that we have to pay attention to as employers and weigh how we offer our benefits to avoid or minimize the risk. What we're worried about is employers haven't thought about this a lot in the past, and the timing of this break in service rule really, really is incredible. So I'm going to explain the break in service rule, and then I'm going to give you a couple of examples of where you better be really, really careful. So the break in service rule essentially says if you have an employee that has no work hours and you're an applicable large employer, and you bring them back to work in less than 13 weeks. So what's happening right now, folks? People have been furloughed, people have been laid off, and now we're trying to bring them back. And this 13-week number is a really relevant number to a lot of people. Some people are coming back in less than 13 weeks. Some people are coming back, have been gone for more than 13 weeks. Here's the point. If you're an applicable large employer and you bring me back in less than 13 weeks, the rule says you're supposed to put me back on coverage as soon as possible with no new waiting period. Okay? And if you don't, that means you didn't offer a full-time employee coverage that month. Okay? Now, if I've been gone more than 13 weeks, you can treat me like a rehire and impose a new whatever your rule is. Why is this so important for the employer penalty? Well, think about it for a minute. Until the pandemic, I would have said it's unlikely that any employer has 5% of their workforce that's out on furlough that they're bringing back. Right? I mean, just that would have been a relatively uncommon situation. Right now, that's extremely common. Many of you have more than 5% of your workforce that was put out on either furlough or layoff that you're trying to bring back. And if you bring back more than 5% of your workforce and don't offer coverage immediately under the break in service rule, if it's been less than 13 weeks, you could face the A penalty for that month. And I'll just give you the little, I did the math for you. For every 100 employees, if you fail to offer coverage to 95% of your full-time employees for 1 month, you'll pay a penalty of about $21,000 per 100 full-time employees you have. So you can figure that out. If you just miss a month, $21,000 times, because that's basically my $214 times 100, easy math, okay? $21,400 for every 100 employees. So let me just summarize it here. I have employees that went out, furloughed or laid off. I'm an applicable large employer. I'm bringing them back. Have they been gone more or less than 13 weeks? Pay attention, because that's going to really help you decide how quickly you have to put them back on the coverage when you bring them back. Before we go to the second one, I'm going to really give Sarah a chance to, maybe both Sarahs, a chance for questions and comments on this one, because this is one I want to be careful. I don't want anyone surprised by a big A penalty next year.
Yeah, Bob, just one quick question for the break in service rules that, whether these only apply when folks aren't on some type of special unpaid leave of absence like FMLA.
Great question, and absolutely not. The break-in service rules apply when someone has no work hours and you're bringing them back. It even would apply to a termination. If you terminated my employment 12 weeks ago and rehired me after 12 weeks, the rule would apply. So it's much broader than just those special leaves, right? Now, again, I have been accused of being a worrywart. Okay. But this is just one of those things that I think a lot of employers, if they didn't know about this rule, I laid a bunch of people off, I rehire them 12 weeks later. My standard rules might have in the past been, I have them wait a 30-day waiting period again. That might have been my standard rule in the past. Now that's putting me at risk because I have so many people I'm bringing back of this potential penalty. So just be careful. How long have they been gone? How many people are they? And when you bring them back, if it's less than 13 weeks, reinstate them as soon as possible. And then the last bullet point on here is what's going to keep Sarah Gillespie busy for the rest of this year. We've laid a bunch of people off. We've furloughed a bunch of people. We've done all this kind of stuff. And what if you're one of the employers that uses that look back measurement period to define full-time? So again, we're not going to go through a look back measurement period webinar here. We got to wrap things up pretty quick. But with the look back measurement period, you measure someone's hours for the last 12-month period to determine whether they qualify as full-time for next year, right? Well, you got a lot of you have a whole bunch of people that don't have any hours the last couple months. When you go to measure them this year to determine 2021 eligibility, some of your employees are not going to qualify as full-time. Those might be some employees that you want to qualify as full-time, that you want to cover next year. And so you need to think about adjusting your eligibility, working with your carriers, working with your stop-loss carriers, if those employees that you furloughed for a couple of months don't meet full-time eligibility and they're back now and you want them to be treated as full-time. And again, this is where Sarah, your team, and the Lipscomb and Pitts team is going to just be invaluable in setting up what are those eligibility rules, what do we want to talk about with these people going into 2021. And I think some employers are probably going to need to make some changes, aren't they?
Probably. One of the things that you can do as well is what's used for the special unpaid leave and use the averaging methods. If you want to look at the measurement period and try to eliminate the impact of the furlough or the termination or whatever it was, the time they were gone. But generally for special unpaid leave situations, the old rule, the original rule,
Yep.
is that you can either exclude the period where they were not working or didn't have as many hours or reduced hours, or you could take the other average from the rest of the time and include that in the time when they were gone, so that it looks as if the average had extended over the entire measurement period. So that's what I've been suggesting to employers who are wanting ways to help their employees come back and be eligible.
And I shouldn't assume that's what every employer wants to do. You just need to decide, right? Because some employers, maybe if I'm financially struggling, maybe I need to say this year that, hey, all these people were laid off, aren't going to earn full-time status next year. And that would be, legal. So I don't want to sound judgmental that that's a wrong decision. You just need to be aware of what happened this year does to your eligibility next year, right? All right. Well, we got to wrap up here because I know you got a couple more things to cover and we promised to stay on time. So I just want to take out my crystal ball, folks. And not really a crystal ball, but I want you, if you don't know that there's hot and heavy debates going on in DC about the next version of legislation for to deal with the pandemic, then you must be living on Mars, because it's all that's been in the news this last week. And so just a quick background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what we already know, and then what we don't know, but we think is happening. And I literally checked my news feeds and stuff right before logging on to see if there's any news about a settlement. And there wasn't an hour ago, but that could have been settled in the last hour for all I know. That's how fast it's happening. There's two pieces of legislation that are in play. The HEROES Act was passed by the House of Representatives back in May. Again, I'm not going to go through all the unemployment stuff that you're hearing in the news. These are elements that are in the House version of the HEROES Act that affect your employee benefits plans. There's some new special enrollment period on the public exchange. There is a requirement to cover COVID-19 treatment at 100%, not just testing. There are some new Cobra notice requirements. Look at the Section 125 changes. There's an increase in the max that people can put in their dependent care plan. There's a permanent carryover change. There's allowing, Sarah Gillespie said it earlier, I know she stepped away, allowing DCAP carryovers to next year. This is, now I want to be careful. This is all just proposed. None of this is passed yet. This is just in pieces of legislation that they're debating right now. Okay. So a lot of potential changes in that legislation that we're keeping an eye on. The biggie is the Cobra subsidy. If you haven't heard about it yet, the HEROES Act includes a Cobra subsidy where the federal government would subsidize 100% of Cobra premiums for people who are terminated or furloughed or put on leave. Okay. And when you combine the Cobra subsidy with the ability of people to elect Cobra late, this is going to be an interesting one. If we get a Cobra subsidy, we're going to have our work cut out for us, because some people that didn't take Cobra because they couldn't afford it could now make late elections and take advantage of the Cobra subsidy. So there's a big Cobra subsidy in the HEROES Act. There is nothing in terms of a Cobra subsidy in the Senate bill that's been proposed so far. The Senate has actually released 7 bills that are rolled up into a single one that they're calling the I'm blocking on what the HEALS Act. So we got the HEROES Act and the HEALS Act, and Senate and House are negotiating, trying to see what happens. Nothing in the Cobra Senate one that we've seen yet. So this could happen today. We could see in the next few minutes a bill that has new changes in it. Lipscomb and Pitts will tell you about what those changes are quickly after it passes. So watch the news and put on your seatbelts and get ready for maybe dealing with a few more things in the next week or two. So Betsy, I gave you 1 whopping minute to the bottom of the hour to wrap things up. I'm sorry I didn't give you a couple more, but thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you to both Sarahs for helping out, and take care everybody out there. You're working hard, but you're helping your employees. Health insurance and benefits are really important in a time like this. So I'll turn it back to Betsy. Thanks everybody.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Bob, and both Sarahs. That was wonderful. And just a reminder that Bob offers a webinar the last Thursday of every month on various compliance topics, and Sarah always includes that webinar registration information in her monthly webinar newsletters that she provides everybody. So again, thank you. And if for some reason you guys did not have a chance to submit your question, feel free to submit it to me. My information is on the screen right now. I'll be glad to help you with that and get it to the right person to get you that right answer. Thank you again for attending today's webinar. Monday, you guys will receive a thank you email, which will have a link to today's presentations, HRCI and SHRM credit information, and also a link to a recording of our webinar. If for some reason you still want to complete our survey and didn't have a chance earlier this year to do that, again, let me know. I'll be glad to send you the link. That will be open until the mid of December this year. And again, if you have any questions about any benefit needs from today's webinar, whatever it may be, feel free to contact me, and I will get back with you as soon as I can. And thank you guys again.